judgment.
Dinesh D'Souza was sentenced on Tuesday to spend 8 months in a confinement center.
It all began when the Obama administration tried to shut me up.
You know, gang's all about stealing, man.
What did I learn? All crime is about stealing. The big criminals are still at large.
Didn't see any reason to keep them.
The system doesn't go after them because they run the system. It's time to go behind the curtain and discover the soul of the Democratic Party.
50 lashes. That feels. Come on. The Democrats support slaves.
This Civil Rights Act will allow colored men to sit at the same table beside the white guests.
Contaminate all Democrats who are now furnishing arms to the Ku Klux Klan.
To the Democratic Party. Why has all this been swept under the rug?
To cover the tracks of the Democratic Party.
And we're not even talking about ancient history.
The racism continued well into the 20th century.
That as long as the black man continues to ravish our white women, we will continue to lynch him.
We gotta give him a little something.
Plantation politics.
The Democrats went from slavery to enslavement.
Corrupt big city bosses, that's how you get corrupt unions.
What does progressive actually mean?
Social engineering and social control.
The most merciful thing that a large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it.
The opening video at the Democratic Convention in 2012, government is the one thing we all belong to. Because no, government belongs to us. We don't belong to it.
What are these Democrats hiding?
This is about buying and selling influence by foreign oligarchs and foreign governments. When you follow the money, there are very, very few coincidences.
What if the goal of the Democratic Party is to steal the most valuable thing the world has ever produced? What if their plan is to steal America? Who will stop them now?
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to present to you a friend of this congregation and this conference, author and director, Mr. Dinesh D'Souza.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Wow, this looks like a very festive gathering here. Maybe I'll take this out. That's not going to work. Okay. I am thrilled and honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be accompanied by my wife, Debbie. I'm going to say hi to everyone. We're actually newlyweds. And if you saw, by the way, the movie Hillary's America, Debbie sang God Bless America in the film. So that was her voice. I'd like to talk today about this particular strange moment that we are facing in our country's history, and what we, as Christians and as citizens, can do about it. Now, when I say we, I don't just mean we in the abstract, and I don't just mean do about it in the sense of we're going to win this election, rah, rah, rah. I want to talk about how we can think about and respond to this particular crisis that we face in the United States today, one that is quite unique in American history. I'll say a word about myself. I came to the United States at the age of 17 as an exchange student. I grew up in Mumbai, India. Now, I actually grew up in a Christian family. My ancestors were converted by Portuguese missionaries who came to India actually starting in the 16th century. The Christianity I was raised in, however, was more of a social Christianity, and it was not until adult life that I began to re-examine and rediscover the faith that I had been raised in as a child. I came to America not knowing what to expect. I kind of remember the airplane descending on New York City. I looked out of the window, I saw the skyline of New York, and I saw the Statue of Liberty. And a kind of a strange feeling came over me. I thought to myself, you know, your life is going to be completely different from this moment on. I kind of had this strange sense that I was moving from the margin of the world to the center. And I recognized even then that if I stayed in America, I would be able to live a different kind of life than if I returned to India. America is a country in which we can be, to a degree that I would not have thought possible, the architect of our own destiny. It's a country in which we are, again, to a large degree, in the driver's seat of our own life. In America, your destiny isn't given to you, it's constructed by you. And I have seen this American dream play out in a very dramatic way in my own life. By the way, this American dream is not merely a dream of economic opportunity. If I were to think about my own life and how it's different living here, materially I'm better off. But I grew up in a middle-class family. My dad was an engineer. My mom was a school teacher. In material terms, my life is better, but it's not a radical difference. The radical difference is that I've been able to do things with my life that would not have been possible had I stayed in India. Now, this American dream is an aspiration. It's an aspiration to betterment, to doing something with your life. And it's a very unique thing. As far as I know, no other country has a dream. There's no Chinese dream that I'm aware of, or no French dream. There's no Indian dream. So this is one of the distinctive aspects of America. The historians call it American exceptionalism. Oddly enough, Obama, the president, is a walking embodiment of American exceptionalism. His life is unimaginable anywhere except in America. But oddly enough, he is at the same time a kind of critic of American exceptionalism. And so we find that probably for the first time in American history, American exceptionalism itself has become a controversial issue. American politics has changed a lot in the time that I've been here. When I first became interested in politics, this was in the 1980s, I kind of caught the Reagan bug. You know, here was Reagan, and he was a very whimsical, almost implausible man to be running for president. And yet he was making very large claims about the world and challenging the big idea of the 20th century. The big idea of the 20th century, collectivism. We had a Soviet empire abroad. You had an expanding welfare state at home. And so Reagan was challenging all this, and I was very intrigued by this as a young freshman in college. And I kind of became a Reaganite. But the way I looked at American politics at that time was that American politics is an argument between two groups of people who want to go to the same place. In other words, in American politics, we agree on the goal, but we disagree about the means. After all, everybody wants America to be strong. Everybody wants America to be prosperous. Everybody wants to live not only in the free society, but in the decent society. We need a measure of law and order. We also need a society which acknowledges an external code of morality. We agree on this. Where we disagree is about some of the techniques of getting from here to there. I think one of the remarkable things I've realized in the intervening generation, the last 25 years, is that this common understanding of American politics has broken down. One group wants to go to Maine, and the other group wants to go to Chicago. And this renders obsolete all the well-meaning people who say things like, I just wish the two sides would sit down and have a lengthy conversation and work out their differences and come. You can do that if you're going to the same place. But if you're two sides of a tug of war, both pulling on the rope and each one trying to go in an opposite direction, that kind of dialogue becomes a little bit pointless. I think if we think of guys like Obama and Hillary, they are in some fundamental way different than the Democrats who came before. They're different than Dukakis. They're different than Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, if I can be kind of honest about it, a well-meaning nincompoop. I think if there was an award for presidential nincompoopery, he would hold the undisputed title. And I say this because there are a lot of people today who would say the same thing about Obama. Oh, Obama just doesn't know what's going on. And so there are all kinds of efforts to lecture Obama about how to do things that he has no interest in doing. Hey, Obama, this is how we can have a more market-oriented healthcare system. He's not interested. He doesn't want to do that. Hey, Obama, this is a way to reduce the load of burdensome federal regulation. He could care less about that. Hey, Obama, here's a way to strengthen American influence in the Middle East. He actually has been actively pursuing the opposite. So I think what you get with Obama is an ideology that sees America as a threatening force in the world. For the first time with Obama, I see a president who doesn't view himself as from within America fighting for America. I see a president who sees himself as, in an Olympian way, detached from America. He's outside of America. He represents the world. America is a petulant, demanding infant, bawling and scratching and making demands on Obama, and his job is to imperiously say no. No, America, don't be unreasonable. So you've got this peculiar situation. I say peculiar because we live in a democracy, and presumably we elect leaders to fight for us. That's the point of a democracy. We want people to represent our lives, our welfare, our interests. And we have a president who doesn't see his job apparently as one of doing that. One of doing that. Now, when we think back to American history, America is a country that has been formed out of three core principles. The first one is the idea of economic freedom. And economic freedom is not some bizarre Adam Smithian theory. Abraham Lincoln put it really well. The simple idea is that the hand that grows the corn should be able to put the corn into its own mouth. In other words, we should generally get to keep the fruits of our labor. And Lincoln, in fact, defined slavery in terms of the principle, you work, I eat. So slavery is the idea that one guy raises the corn and another guy eats it. The theft of another man's labor is the essence of slavery. And so economic freedom. The second type of freedom is political freedom, and that simply means is participation in democratic self-government. And the third is civic freedom, civil rights, human rights, the ability to practice our own faith, to speak our own mind, personal freedom, you might say. So these are these three types of freedom, 1, 2, and 3, economic freedom, political freedom, let's call it civic or civil freedom. But there is one type of freedom that the American founders did not endorse. It's the missing type of freedom. And I say that because today that type of freedom is at the forefront. The American founders believed that there is a moral order in the universe that is external to us, that makes claims on us. This moral order can be represented by the Ten Commandments or by any comparable moral code. And it's important to realize that in American history, until very recently, this was completely uncontroversial. You didn't have to go, even if someone was not a Christian or Jewish or not a believer at all, and you said, hey, the Ten Commandments is a good way to live. Most people would go, well, yeah, obviously. It was not something to be fought over. And so, this is not to say that everybody lived up to the code. But the code supplied an unwavering standard. Everyone acknowledged its existence, and our job was to kind of try our best to raise our standard to the moral code. Now, I say this because to me the biggest difference I've seen in America from the way it used to be to now is that we have seen in America the emergence of a new type of freedom. I'm going to call it moral freedom. Moral freedom. And moral freedom is not, as some people would say, a complete rejection of morality, i.e., I don't believe in morality. Being human, we can't get rid of morality. In fact, if somebody truly gets rid of morality, if they can't tell the difference between right and wrong, they become a psychopath. In a certain sense, they're not even a member of the human, adult, morally responsible species. So what has happened in America isn't that people reject morality. They have essentially, and this is true of young people, they have relocated morality from out there to in here. In other words, what we have seen is a great shift in the source of morality, from the external code to what I'm going to call the inner self. The inner self. And this inner self becomes the referee and the arbiter of morality. This started in the 1960s. It was mainly found in bohemian areas of America, but now it's very widespread in the culture. And it makes the so-called social issues in American politics very difficult to fight. Why? Because ultimately, the social issues do not come down to, is this right and wrong? The idea of right and wrong implies some existing external code. It comes really down to how each person feels about it. And your inner self gets to trump any external claim of morality. Now, all of this may sound a little abstract, and it's important to realize that these ideas are not taught as philosophical nostrums. They are actually fought out in the culture, and the political left, which is a very secular left. I'm always amused by people who try to say Obama is a Muslim. I mean, this seems to be a guy with no religious bone in his body. I don't know if you agree, but I think here's a guy who sees the world in a secular, fundamentally secular way. And the secular left in this country has been aggressively promoting moral freedom using its three big megaphones. Its three big megaphones are academia, Hollywood, and the media. Now, those are perhaps the three biggest megaphones of our culture, and they can put out a whole lot of information, they can put out a whole lot of disinformation, they can put out a whole lot of propaganda. But remember that by and large these megaphones are operating uncontested. If you think of something like the gay marriage debate, the gay marriage debate didn't begin when there were referendums in California about gay marriage. The gay marriage debate began when Ellen came out of the closet, and 200 sitcoms and all these movies. And so, in other words, the left has been fighting this culture war using its big megaphones with no rival megaphones on the other side. Think of something like the great influence in our culture today of comedy. The left has Colbert, they have Bill Maher, they have Jon Stewart. We have, well, basically nobody, nobody, and nobody. And not only do young people get their sense of what is hip, what is cool, but they also get their information about politics from these guys. So many times as parents, as grandparents, we are a little surprised to see our own young people wandering away from the values in which we tried to raise them. Not only their political values, but also their religious values. Hey, Dad, I've decided to stop being a Christian. That whole stuff doesn't even make any sense anymore. Why does this happen to us? It happens to us because essentially we have created a situation in which our own culture is doing war with our cherished beliefs. And sometimes we are subsidizing, when we pay tuition and send our children off to college, we're often the actual instruments of paying the bills of the people who are actively subverting within our children's own hearts our values. So this is a little bit of the predicament that we face in America today. And conservatism and Christianity are not the same thing. They're two separate things. But they are both under the same they are both facing the same kind of problems in the culture. The position of the conservatives and the Christians is the weakest. If you look, for example, at a typical college campus, University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, or my own alma mater, Dartmouth, probably the worst thing to be if you are a professor in those colleges is a conservative. Probably the one unspeakable thing to do in politics right now would be to say a good word about Trump. On the other hand, if there is one thing that is even worse than that, it would be to be a public, acknowledged, outspoken Christian. That would be seen as even more out there. Why? Because in some senses our culture has set things up, and the universities have set things up, that Christianity is identified completely with irrationality, with faith. And faith is seen as the opposite of reason. Faith is seen as the opposite of evidence. And in fact, I remember a professor of mine talking about the famous scene in which Jesus asked the apostle, after he comes back, and he says, "Show me your hands." And Jesus does. And then he believes that is Jesus. But Jesus says, "You believe because I'm showing you. But blessed are those who believe without having seen." And the professor said to the class, this attitude that Jesus has, that you're better off not knowing, not asking for evidence, you're better off having faith instead of proof, is the essential antithesis of the university. The university stands for the opposite. The university is show me, prove it, use evidence. And so what we're getting at here is we're seeing the way in which the whole process of learning itself is set up to make our young people believe that part of growing up is moving away from their Christian faith. It's their job to do that, to become an enlightened and intelligent person. Now, American politics today has, I think, reached a very precarious point in which the American dream itself hangs in the balance. Hangs in the balance in the sense that the country is in so much, our influence in the world. You know, it used to be in America that, and this is only 15 years ago, you could look around the world and nothing important could happen anywhere without the United States having at least a big say-so. You couldn't do something important in South America. You couldn't sign a treaty in the Middle East. Russia couldn't do anything in Europe. Nothing could happen in the Far East without the United States having essentially the broker's role in deciding the outcome. We've seen within a short time such a transformation that all kinds of things are happening in the world today, and not only is the United States irrelevant to them, it's almost like the United States is powerless to do anything even if it wanted to. This transformation, I think, is deliberate. And by deliberate, I mean it is not the product of somebody who is a secret Muslim or a terrorist, but rather it's part of an ideology that sees America as the bad guy. If you see America as the bad guy, you're then going to say, why do we want to live in a world in which one country, America, bosses everybody around? Why don't we try to go to a multipolar world in which power is distributed among 10 countries? Let's just say Russia, Brazil, China, India, Germany, France, and America. So America has a seat at the table, but we're no longer living in this unipolar world. It's now going to be a multipolar world. Many actors at the table. Now, domestically, within the United States, we have essentially seen not only a massive expansion of the centralized state, the government, but we've actually seen the government do something quite new in the last 8 years that it didn't do before, and that is essentially colonize large sectors of the private sector. In other words, if you look at something like Obamacare, the big thing about Obamacare is the government now controls 1/6 of the US economy. And when we say the government, we don't mean the government, we mean the progressives. It's a bunch of guys who control the government, and they tell the doctors what to do, they tell the hospitals what to do. One of the reasons we're seeing all this stuff about education, notice that Bernie and Hillary have these proposals for free education. Now, if you're a sucker, you're going to go, wow, they're going to give me a free education. Now, everybody knows that actual education isn't free. If you have a school, you have a college, you need to have facilities, you need to have dorms, you need to have technology. So education isn't actually free. So free education doesn't mean that. Free education actually means that someone else is going to pay. Well, who is that? Who's the someone else who's going to pay? The country is $19 trillion in debt. So the obvious answer is we're going to borrow the money. We're going to borrow the money. But when you borrow the money, you are essentially it's like reaching into a young person's back pocket and lifting his future earnings. That's the meaning of borrowing money in an era where the deficit and the debt is going to be handed over to the next generation. We're essentially stealing from young people, taking their future earnings and spending it now. So essentially what Hillary and Bernie are doing to young people is the following. They're saying, listen, you need to pay for college. We're going to reach into your back pocket, take your money from your future earnings and give it to you, or give some of it to you now. This is, in the old days we used to talk about robbing Peter to pay Paul. This is robbing Paul to pay Paul. Because you're taking money from the same guy. But you're acting like you're doing him a favor. You're not doing him any favor at all. So the only reason to do this is the following. It is to give the idea that somehow the progressives, in this case Hillary, are giving us something for free. what they're actually doing is taking over another huge sector, which is the sector of education. Another mammoth aspect of the U.S. economy that was previously outside their control. So here we are as citizens, and here we are as Christians, and not only is it true that we are living in a country where Christian assumptions can no longer be taken for granted, not only are we living in a country in which the external moral code has broken down as a consensus of the society, but we suddenly find that even the simple job of going about our ordinary business unmolested is becoming increasingly difficult. In other words, what if you said, look, we've lost the country, let it go. All we want to do is live our own life and leave us alone. All we want to do is be able to go to school and go to work and look after our kids and teach them our values. And all we want to do is go to church and worship as we will. And we suddenly have this rather uncomfortable feeling that even if we were to surrender in that way, they wouldn't be content with that. They wouldn't let us do that. Their goal is actually to come after us and pursue us into our homes and into our churches and make sure that we conform with their guidelines and their requirements. Otherwise, they're going to make life extremely difficult for us. And they have very powerful ways of doing that. There is today we live under a federal criminal code that is so expansive that literally the federal government can run its finger through this audience and pick out anyone and decide to charge them with a series of federal crimes, felonies, that added together would put this adult individual away for at least 10 years. And they can do that to you now based upon nothing that you are about to do or any crime that you may have contemplated, just based upon what you have already done so far. And the reason is our federal statutes are so accordion-like that they are amenable to making these kinds of accusations. And before I came up to the podium, I was talking to someone who is a family care practitioner. All right? So here's the charge. Illegally prescribing pain care medicine. Now, obviously the doctor prescribes pain care medicine to reduce pain. But there are federal laws that talk about giving pain medicine to people who don't really need it. And so right away they go to the doctor and say, we're going to charge you with illegally prescribing pain care medicine. The penalty is the permanent forfeiture of your medical license, up to 5 years in prison. But if you plead guilty, we will have you pay a fine of $100,000. We will give you 6 months, and we will not forfeit your license. In other words, what the government has is the power to blackmail you or to bludgeon you using the plea bargain system. Either you risk destroying your whole life and never being able to practice your profession again, or whether you're innocent or guilty, you plead guilty. And then we have you under our thumb at that point. The criminal law itself becomes a mechanism to reduce you to subservience. This is not the Soviet Union where they send you off to the gulag. But Alexis de Tocqueville foresaw this. He called it soft despotism. It's a softer form of despotism because it uses all the forms of a democratic society. It is outwardly covered in the garb of legality. You'll have a lawyer, they'll have a lawyer. You'll go before a judge. The judge will look at the charges and ask you how you plead. So outwardly, you're conforming to all your constitutional rights are secure. Except when you step back, you go, no rational person would fight this case because the risk is too high. Even in my own case, where I exceeded the campaign finance laws, I gave $20,000 to a college friend of mine who was running for the Senate. I broke the law. I didn't mean to. I didn't realize I was breaking the law, but I did. Now, no American has ever been locked up for doing what I did. And so the government charged me. My natural instinct was to fight. But the sentence for this offense, called exceeding the campaign finance law, was up to 2 years in federal prison. In order to make sure that I pled guilty, the government added a second charge. It was called causing the government to file a false document. What was that charge? Nothing. It was nothing more than what I did originally. By essentially making the contribution, the government filed a false document, and that charge, however, carried 5 years. So suddenly what they're saying to me is, Dinesh, you can take your chances with the jury, and maybe you have a 75% chance of getting off, but in the 25% chance that you're found guilty, we get to lock you up for 5 years. And that essentially would wipe out your career, it would essentially destroy your family life, it would put you out of business almost permanently. So then I have to weigh the risk of whether or not I want to do that, and I'm submitting that no reasonable person would want to. Now, let's pivot for a moment to our role as Christians. It turns out that as Christians, we have at our disposal a megaphone. It's called the church. Because if the left has the media, if they have academia, if they have Hollywood, we have these churches across the country, thousands of them. And for some reason, a lot of these churches have persuaded themselves, we have a megaphone, but it should not be used politically. Now, why? Because we have a separation of government and politics. By the way, when I talk about the separation of church and state, kind of reminded of this Catholic priest at Dartmouth. This, I think, was in my freshman year, 1980. He made the comment, he goes, you know, a lot of people are warning me about the danger of mixing religion and politics. And he goes, and I agree with them. And therefore, in the 2 months leading up to the election, he goes, I think I'm going to forget about religion. So, anyway, I'm just reminded of that quip. But the point I want to make here is this. The anxiety about mixing religion and politics is actually quite misplaced. The purpose of having a separation of religion and government is to avoid theological differences to become the basis of political fights. And so, for example, you don't want a politics in which, for example, transubstantiation, or what happens to the soul at the moment of death, becomes the object of a political struggle. But the founders, while separating theology from politics, never had the intention of separating morality from it. So I think that there is an important distinction to be made between theology, or the sphere of revelation, which is, if you will, out of bounds, and the whole sphere of civic and public morality, which is actually what politics is all about. Politics is all about deciding what kind of society we want to live in. Not just what kind of economic policies we have, but what is the actual fabric and texture of the society we want to live in. The Christians on the college campus are by and large the weakest, most abstemious, least engaged fighters for their own beliefs. I wrote 3 books on apologetics between 2007 and 2011. When I go on campus, the college Republicans are always happy to put up posters, organize debates. The more left-wing the campus, the more the conservatives are there to stir things up. But the Christians, for some reason, don't want to do that. They're very timid. They say things like, Dinesh, we like your message, but we don't really like the idea of a debate. A debate is kind of a little confrontational. How about if we have a dialogue? A dialogue. And I say, gee, guys, I mean, to me, a debate is basically a dialogue in which you come out on top. That's the definition of a debate. So, once again, I'm stressing that the aggression that is coming on the college campus is coming from the other side. If it were possible to leave things alone and be left alone, that might be a reasonable option. Just like in politics today, people say things like, I'm standing on principle, I'm never voting for Trump. Now, I think to myself, and all kinds of things go through my head. The first time I heard that, I was actually thinking about the original Christians who stood on principle in the 19th century. These were the abolitionists. These were the people who wanted America to end slavery right now. And those guys were like, we're not getting involved in politics, we're going to stand on principle. And for years, politically, they were completely ineffective. They had no ability to end slavery. In fact, at their meetings, one of their most common activities was to burn the U.S. Constitution, because they blamed the founders for letting slavery continue at all. It was only when the abolitionists were integrated into the Republican Party, it was only when the Republican Party won the election of 1860, it's only then when the Republican Party, it was the Republican Party that ended slavery, not the abolitionists. And so politically now, if you want to stop Hillary and the Democrats, the only way to do that is Trump and the Republicans. There is no other way. There is no third option. It's certainly not going to be easy. Every time I turn on the television, I mean, we have had a biased media before, but this level of hostility to Trump and this level of cover-up for Hillary is unprecedented. I mean, you might even remember the little scene about when Hillary, virtually collapsed into her limousine. Now, think of what would have happened if the only person present when that occurred was a reporter for the New York Times. I can guarantee you that that article would not be in the New York Times the next day. And the same is true of CBS. So it was only because some guy was there with his cell phone. We are now relying on, you may say, freelance journalism of the guy who happened to turn his phone on and happened to record that, and that's how we got the news. So this is actually a very disgraceful sight. We have this whole division of our society, the press, the fourth estate, the people who are supposed to keep a check on the government. And what are they doing? Are they telling us what's going on? No. When I look at the TV, what I see to myself is that by hook or by crook, you've got the media, so many of them. And what they're trying to do is essentially drag this crooked hag across the finish line. That's their job. Yeah. I want to leave time for questions, and so I promised myself that in these opening remarks I would try to adopt the motto that King Henry VIII used with one of his wives. He said, "I won't keep you too long." But let me close by saying that there are a few times in American history when it is incumbent upon us as citizens to do more, to be more involved and to be more active. Now, one of the great things about America is that normally you don't have to. Normally, you no more need to research the founding of this country than if you live in a house, you have to go investigate the blueprints of your house. You don't. You live in it. You just lie on the couch, you walk in the hallways. But it's only when your house begins to shake then you say, hey, I better get up in the attic. I better figure out how this thing is put together. And we are living at one of those times in which, by tragic necessity, the responsibility of protecting the American dream falls into our hands. It is actually up to us. The good news is we have a lot of influence if we will use it. Most people have no idea how much influence they have, and we only use a tiny fraction of it. And someone says, well, you know, I only have 50 friends on Facebook. Well, yeah, but they've all got 50 friends on Facebook. There's a multiplier influence. If you will creatively use your talent and your imagination, you can become a very powerful force. I was a writer and speaker for most of my life. The reason I pivoted into movies was because I wanted to reach a bigger audience. But not just that. It's also because a film appeals to the head and the heart. If you write a book, it appeals to the mind. If you screen a play, if you go to the theater, that appeals to your ear. You're mainly listening to dialogue. There's only so much they can show you. But with a movie, it engages all the senses and it draws you in. I know a way to win the election, or one way, and that is we're trying to convince Trump and the RNC and the super PACs to take the movie Hillary's America and drop it into the mailboxes of the 4 to 5 million swing voters who inhabit about 9 states. That will quite likely decide this election. I urge you to get the word out in your own way and in your own circle. This is a very strange election. Oddly enough, I think it's Trump's election to lose. Now, it was Romney's election to lose 4 years ago, and he lost it. And Republicans do have a remarkable ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. But I'm hoping that this year will be different. And so I close by saying that this is a country that has meant so much to us, so much to me, so much to you. Our lives are so different because we live here, and we want to pass this legacy on to our children and to our grandchildren. My politics is based on that. I hope yours is. I think together, working in a creative and effective way, we can help heal and restore this country. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Questions? Okay. Microphone runners, prepare with the microphones. If you'd be seated, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, raise your hand and we'll do our best to get as many in as we can within the next few minutes. Let's see, we are on track here, so we're doing fine. We have a question right up here in the front. Mrs. Helmreich, Joshua, come on up. She's one of our day school teachers, and she's got a very strong voice, but we need the microphone.
Hopefully I'm not caught yelling at the students, though. I was privileged to attend Hillsdale College, where I was taught that our government serves two purposes: to serve and to protect from all enemies, foreign and domestic. What do we do about a government now that is so self-serving and allows our veterans to live on the street with no care and brings in all of our refugees? Do we need an amendment that all laws passed by our legislature should pertain to them as well? I know it's a possibility to vote them out of office, but we had the privilege of having John Dingell for 50 years. People do not vote out our politicians. What do we do?
You're quite right that the fundamental job of any government is to protect us from foreign and domestic thugs. That's their first job. If the government does that well, it can then go on and do other things. But if it's not doing those two things, So we live at a peculiar time when the government is doing a poor job in the fundamental things it's supposed to do, and it's undertaking all these other missions. And you have to step back and ask, why is it doing that? And to add a second bizarre question to that, why is it the case that people whose lives are not made better still vote for a party that is not making them better? So I think if we can answer those two questions, it'll point us to where the solutions actually lie. So let me start with the second one, which is the John Dingell question. How is it that, let's look at our inner cities. They're a total mess. Many of them are in the same condition that they were in 1968. We spent all this money to fight poverty, and yet there's poverty, there's dependency, there's violence. If you look at all these urban shootings, I don't take the view that it's not the cops' fault, it's the bad guy's fault. I take the view that what's going on is that the democratic urban plantation is boiling over. In other words, we've created these unlivable neighborhoods, then we send 25-year-old cops into an impossible situation where people are living horrible lives. They essentially are growing up with PTSD, and everything is at a hair trigger, and something is bound to go wrong, and it does go wrong. So the real question is not how the Jesse Jacksons of the world exploit the situation. The real question is, why would these urban neighborhoods continue to return to office by 90% margins the Democratic Party that has misruled them for 50 years? Why would they do that? I think the answer is pretty obvious, and that is that what the Democrats have done in these places is created a kind of permanent dependency and an intergenerational dependency. Now, it was all done on the promise that, look, inner cities, you don't need ladders of opportunity. What you need is us. Here we are on top of a building and we're letting down a rope. You hold on to the rope, we'll pull you up. And people went, well, that's great. Climbing a ladder is a lot of work. I'm just going to hold on to the rope. They're going to do it for me. But what these people never realized from the beginning is that no one ever intended to pull the rope all the way up. That politically, it makes more sense to pull the rope halfway up and hold. Because then you've got the voter right where you want him. He can't come up, so he can't dust himself off and leave. And yet, he depends on you to pay the mortgage, for food stamps, and for welfare, and for this and for that. So there's a whole ensemble of benefits that make it impossible for you to leave, and at the same time, you're miserable with your situation. And that's what we have. And not just for blacks. We have reservations for the Native Americans. We have ghettos and barrios and slums for Hispanics and other minorities. So Trump, to his credit, has at least begun to address this topic. I mean, if you'll notice, in my adult lifetime, no Republican has ever gone here. Not even Reagan. The Republicans, by and large, are scared of the issue of race. And when that topic comes up, they go into total fetal position. If Hillary had used the bigotry card against any of those other guys who were on the podium, any of those other Republicans, they would have gone dead silent. They would have just wished and prayed and hoped that the issue goes away. They'd say things like, let's talk about real issues that matter, as if bigotry isn't an important issue. But, so this is Trump's strength, his fearlessness. It's important not only to be fearless, it's important to be knowledgeable and anchored in history and know your arguments and be able to counter the inevitable counterattacks that are going to come your way. And so we've been doing our best. Because if you look at Hillary's America, the movie, the book, that's the intellectual ammunition for this argument. It's already there. And so it's available to the Trump campaign and to the Republicans if they want to use it. So that doesn't do full justice to a question, but I want to be able to answer a bunch of others. So that's my first stab at it. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Amir Mehdi Khan, and I'm from Pakistan, working from Pablo. My question to you is that this is a personal request as well. We all know that the agenda of Islam and the threat of Islam. Do you think it will be appropriate, or it's a need to make another movie by yourself where you can project the threat to the civilized country and especially to the Christian countries. I just want to give you a little hint that in 1974, in Pakistan, the Islamic countries gathered together and made Islamic war. An agenda of that meeting was to destroy the West and especially America in the next 50 years. And Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey chaired that organization, and still it is working. Do you think that it will be a good subject to make a movie in future? Thank you.
The question is about what is happening in the House of Islam. I think if I were to look at the world and ask myself this question, which worldview, which ideology, which way of thinking about the world is going to triumph in the next 50 years? Who's going to win? You know, when we look at history and we look back, we realize that history has been a record of the winners. We would be living in a completely different society if Germany won World War II. So when we look at the future, we have to ask, who's going to win? And I see only 3 candidates vying for the title. The first is Islam. Islam is vying to be the winner. Not to say that Islam will run the whole world, but Islam would be the dominant force. That's one. The second is Christianity. Christianity has, of all the religions of the world, the greatest power of conversion. In fact, the Muslims expand mainly through reproduction, big families. The Christians expand more through conversion. There are countries in Africa that were 1% Christian 100 years ago. They're 50% Christian now. Christianity has been spreading in Asia. It's spread in South America and in Africa. So Christianity is a real force. That's the second. And the third is kind of a religion that doesn't go by that name, and that would be modern radical secularism. The whole idea that there is no spiritual horizon, that we are material beings in a material world, and that a secular society in which religion is by and large driven from public spaces of the society. This is the third candidate for the future. Now, it would seem at first glance that the second and the third would unite against the first. In other words, that in America, the radical secularists would say, the radical Muslims are a big threat, let's ally with these Christians to fight that. But this is not the case. We have the peculiarity that the first and the third appear to be allying against the second. In other words, we have a strange bedfellows between Islam on the one side and secular progressivism on the other. How can secular progressivism possibly accommodate Islam? It essentially tries to accommodate it by treating it as just another minority. The Muslims are kind of like the blacks. Let's just import them into the multicultural alliance, and let's just protect them the same way we protect other disadvantaged minorities. Circling back to your question, this phenomenon of radical Islam, I think, is quite unique. I'm not sure if it is the essence of Islam. Some people think it is. The question I raise is, what is it about Islam today that's doing this, that's generating this toxic radicalism? Remember that most Muslims are not terrorists. But in our time and in our world, most terrorists are Muslims. You don't see Buddhist suicide bombers. You don't see other religions doing the things that are going on within Islam. And so this is a peculiar threat of our time. Again, I think as a country we would be more than adequate to deal with it. The problem is that our leadership, in this case Obama, has no interest in carrying on that fight. He has no interest in even doing that. So, and I think with Hillary you're going to see the same thing. So to me, politically, we need to be aware of the problem abroad, but we also are fighting an enemy at home. And that's what makes our political struggle more difficult. We're facing threats on the foreign front, but we're also facing threats on the domestic front. Okay?
There was one of the college students in the back.
So you said earlier that the only way to stop Hillary and the Democrats from taking over the White House is to vote Trump and go with the Republicans. But as a millennial, that's not a sentiment that is shared by many conservatives and many Christians. Whether it's I can't vote Trump because I don't like him, or I can't vote Trump because I don't trust him. You know, we have the media, you know, on social media and the news plastering in our faces, don't vote Trump for X, Y, and Z reasons. I kind of will occasionally make fun of my fellow Christians by applying the rhetoric of, oh, I can't in good conscience vote for anyone with a sinful nature. So what would you say to those who would rather vote third party and go Gary Johnson when, what would you tell these people that for whatever reason don't want Trump, don't want Hillary, won't vote either, when in reality a vote for non-Trump is an honorary vote for Hillary? What would you say to those people?
Well, to some of those people, there is nothing you can say, and that's because they do not think in terms of outcomes or consequences. Think of it this way. Morality can be viewed as intentional or consequential, right? Intentional morality would be, what was my motive? Even if I did something that was terrible, since my motive is pure, I'm pure. A consequential view is different. A consequential view says, what are the results of my actions? How are the results of my actions going to make things better or going to make things worse? Now, politics is lived in the consequential domain, right? In other words, politics is the outcome of an election and what that's going to mean for America in the next 4 or 8 years. Now, if someone says, I don't care about that, I'm not actually trying to make the consequences as good as I can. I am only concerned with the purity of my own intentions. And therefore, if I'm going to vote for a lesser evil, I'm not doing it, because a lesser evil is still an evil, and in this way, I protect my own purity, and the consequences be damned. There's not a whole lot you can say to such a person, because their goal is self-protection. They're not concerned with the society at all. Now, if someone were to say to me something like, someone could say, I don't like Trump, I don't like Hillary, I think if I voted for Trump, he would make things so bad that the Democrats would then sweep the House and the Senate and the presidency the next time. So I'm willing to lose this time because I think we can win next time. That would actually be a consequential argument. It would make no sense, but it would nevertheless be an effort in the right direction. Mostly the people who say never Trump, first of all, even their indictment of Trump is unbelievably shallow and wrong. They'll say, don't you know Trump is a bigot? Well, Trump is actually not a bigot. Trump has actually said, Trump does shoot off at the mouth, don't get me wrong. Trump is capable of being insensitive, but insensitivity is not bigotry. To call some guy a Mexican is not a good idea. It's like calling me, I'm an American citizen of Indian descent. Let's say you were to call me, hey, Indian. Maybe an impolite thing to do, doesn't make you a racist. So what's happened with Trump is that the normal standards of weighing evidence are kind of out the window. I suppose part of it is that is Trump's, off-the-cuff, bloviating style, which does turn a lot of people off. Quite frankly, I also saw this with Bush, with George W. Bush. His sort of Texan demeanor, which is actually quite normal in Texas. a lot of people on the East Coast were sort of, what's he trying to do? So, look, I don't share that antipathy to Trump. I do think that Trump is an outsider. Now, when you're an outsider, you're gonna get the pluses and minuses of being an outsider. The minuses are gonna be that you don't know enough, you're gonna be learning to some degree on the job, and you don't know that there's some crazy stuff that you shouldn't actually say in public. But if on the other hand you say, at the end of the day, it's going to be kind of healthy to bring in an outsider, then these don't seem like terribly high prices to pay for cleaning up an infestation that really does need a little bit of detoxifying from the outside. Yes.
Mr. Dinesh, thank you so much for being here. I love your documentaries and your books. Thank you, our Savior, Pastor, for bringing him here. However you got this going on today, it's just been great. My name's Bonnie, and back to your movies. Mr. Trump is so rich. Why can't he just put it on prime time? Hillary's America. I thought about that when Romney was running. Why wouldn't he put Obama 2016 on? But a whole bunch of people I know wouldn't understand Obama 2016 or be interested in it. But I think they would understand Hillary's America, and I hope you weren't joking about that, and they don't have to send one to me. But anyway, my other thing is, I'm a 20-year retired veteran from the United States Army. Thank you. Our military is being polluted, just like our society. It's not, and also just our churches. I'm a really nice person, but if you've seen my Facebook, and what you were saying, I'm doing that. My mom's in the nursing home. I'm a grandma. I don't have a lot of, ordinarily I would be campaigning, but I'm at the nursing home every day, so I'm on my Facebook. But Facebook, I see some terrible sites where people are hateful and swearing and really ugly. And that's not me, but if I say Hillary or progressive, they got it out for me, and I can spend 20 minutes making sure I say it the right way, and they are already. And as of today, America is only one of 164 countries sitting at the table for our internet. We do not own the internet, or whatever priority we had before, we no longer have that. I get so frustrated because I ask people, please call, text, go on Facebook and find out who your congressperson is and let them know how you feel. I'm one of the people who really struggled with Donald Trump, but I would never consider the Clintons. But every day Trump makes me pray, and he's just a spoiled little boy, but I think he's got an honest heart, and we're all sinners. Coming to Michigan, this is still maybe not so.
You're such a nice lady, and I don't want to offend you, but we need a question.
The question is, please put the program, your documentary, Hillary's America, on primetime TV. Please come back and know how, I'm asking, how do you deal with family members? Michigan has been an automobile industry, and so many of my family gets their paycheck still from the automobile industry and the unions, and they feel their paycheck depends on it. And I said, well, what about the soul and future of your children? And that's it.
Well, with regard to Facebook, and with regard to the nasty things that people do on social media, this is the Wild West out there. Social media is like that. When I go on Twitter, Literally, there are a half dozen people who are paid to get a notification of my tweet, and they will insult me for, at the second I do it. And they do it all day, and they do it every day. So a normal person under these circumstances is tempted to want to quit. Because if you have a certain humility or decency, you don't want to be in this acrimonious environment. Obscenities, calling you names. Who needs it? So I've realized over time that I have to do something very strange, and that is grow to like it. Grow to like it. This is a very unnatural thing to do, I have to admit. You have to develop a personality in which when you hear howls of dismay, you feel the gratifying sense that you must be doing something right. So he says, become like a pastor. Now, with regard to Trump, this is something that I have to admit is very baffling about our own side. If I were Michael Moore and made this movie, the whole Democratic Party would be behind me. And they were behind Michael Moore's movie, Fahrenheit 9/11, even though intellectually that movie was a complete nullity. But nevertheless, they recognized it was doing work for their side, humiliating Bush. And so there they are promoting it. Now our side doesn't operate like this. And so, for example, I've taken the film, I've sent it to the RNC. Dead silence. Not a word of response. And now I've had 5 different people get it to Trump. I have good reason to believe Trump has seen the movie, he really likes it. But the simple act, now you don't have to be the richest man in the world to do this. The truth of it is, each side in this election is going to spend close to $1 billion. $1 billion. I just saw that Hillary is spending $33 million on advertising in the state of Florida alone. 33 million. Now, you remember how close Florida has been in elections, right? If you sent 100,000 DVDs to swing voters in Florida whose names and addresses are already known, how do we know them? They're the guys who voted for Republicans in 2010 and Obama in 2012. That's the definition of a swing voter. Someone who has swung from one side to the other. The public records have that. The RNC has these names. What I'm getting at is, at a minimal cost, with laser-like efficiency, you could deliver the kind of messaging that we've made at our own expense. Our own investors have paid for this. We've created the messaging. The RNC doesn't know how to do it. Trump doesn't know how to do it. We've done it. All we're telling them is, use it at what would be pennies on the dollar that they will spend to get votes. And as of this date, they're not doing it. Now, I've actually, on my own effort, gone and convinced independent, wealthy donors to buy about 100,000 DVDs to distribute in Ohio and Florida. I'm doing that myself. And that could make the difference in a close election like 2000, which comes down to 5,000 votes or 10,000 votes. This should be done on a much bigger scale. And why our own side operates this way is a mystery to me. I'm doing my best to get around it and solve it, but I don't get it.
We're going to start the panel discussion now instead of taking a break. That's okay. All right. We're not going to take any more questions right now, specifically.